Hey y'all, it's Rick here with Uncommon Communion, coming to you early on Saturday morning, which is still late Friday night for me because I've not been to bed yet. I wanted to share with you something been wanting to talk about in greater depth, and it is the reason that I am recording this video rather than having a written post for you on Saturday. But before I share that, let's begin as we begin all of these times together by recognizing, realizing, affirming, validating, and leaning into the reality that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of the more and each other. I recorded a number of videos over the last week or two because I didn't have time to write post. And it was because I got hooked watching a rare TV show for me. I got to be honest with you, I don't watch a lot of TV or movies these days. I much prefer to either read or do these Uncommon Communion posts. So when I added the TV show Andor, it really did impact my schedule because, again, things were already pretty full. And by adding that, it just kind of, you know, rearranged things. But it was good. And I shared a number of times here about the importance of the message of Andor, what the story is telling us. I have begun using over the last week or so and will continue to use words from Andor about fascism and standing up and how do we fight? How do we get together and how do we overcome oppression and fascism? What I watched tonight, though, was, again, I think it was maybe just my third time, the movie Rogue One. Now, a little bit of context for folks that are not Star Wars fans, or maybe folks that are just kind of casual Star Wars fans. There are, and again, excuse me and forgive me if this is old news to you, but I want to situate what this is, what Rogue One is, and why it is even more important as I begin to wrestle with how do we go forward? What do we do during this time of crisis, during this rising fascism that we are facing? So the original Star Wars came out in 1977. And I'm listening right now to a fascinating podcast episode about the politics of Star Wars. Now, I was 7 years old, 1977, when it came out. And I was not quite probably in the middle of the target demographic, which would probably be like 10 or 12 years old. I was close. 7 was pretty sweet. And at that time, of course, I did not realize what this podcast is emphasizing, that in the original trilogy, that would be Star Wars A New Hope, which is the original Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, that really in many ways was a reaction to the Vietnam War. And these podcast hosts really were speculating about, in George Lucas's, the creator's mind, which side was America. And it seemed pretty clear to these podcasters, as they studied this and read about this and reflected on this, that the empire was America and the rebels were the Viet Cong. And that this was in some ways George Lucas's commentary about the war that we were fighting. By that point was over, 1977, but clearly we understood, or beginning to understand, I think at that point, about the absolute devastation and just the shamefulness, unnecessary shamefulness of that war. So we have those original 3 movies. I think the last one came out in 83. I was 13, definitely more in the target audience. Right around the year 2000, or maybe even a little bit before that, I think it was in the late 90s, because I can remember where I was. what we would call the prequel trilogy comes out. And that was The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Rise of the Sith, I think. I am not the biggest prequel trilogy fan, in part because those were coming out as I was having children, right? That was when my kids were born. Kids were born in '01 and '03, and those movies were coming out in that time range. So we have that trilogy. And then after Disney has bought Star Wars, which I think was around, and again, I didn't do research on this, I do apologize. I think it was around probably around 2010 ish. We got what would be the sequel trilogy, which would be the three most recent Star Wars films. And I'm not even going to attempt to tell you those names because I don't remember. I've seen those films. I saw each of them, I think, in the theaters, but it didn't do that much for me. And I know diehard, Star Wars fans, there's no love lost for some of those films because they got a little ridiculous in some places. Then Disney, of course, trying to get as much mileage out of this franchise, this intellectual property that they bought, which I think they ended up buying it for like $1 billion or something. It was something ridiculous, but it's making them a lot of money. They started putting out individual Star Wars films, right? And these were meant to be kind of their own pieces that were telling parts of the story, right? And one of them was Solo, about Han Solo. There might have been one or two others, I forget. But the one I want to talk about, and the one that really is, I think, the most important, is Rogue One. So Rogue One is all about how the plans for the Death Star get to the rebels, right? Because you may remember in Star Wars, and I'm not giving spoilers away here, but I hope, but in Star Wars, they are able to, they meaning Luke and the rebels, are able to destroy the Death Star because they know of a flaw, the little place where Luke's, laser goes in and causes a chain reaction and destroys the entire Death Star. Well, what the story of Rogue One tells us, which is right before, like literally, it actually overlaps. The end of Rogue One is the beginning of a Star Wars New Hope. What it tells us is that this flaw in the Death Star was made intentionally. And it's the whole story of the man, the scientist who did that, his daughter, who he tells about this flaw, and her journey with others to get those plans and get those to the rebels so that they can destroy the Death Star. And I got to tell you, y'all, Rogue One I hadn't seen for a while. Having watched Andor, which is the story of Cassian Andor, who's one of the two main characters in Rogue One, besides this woman, Jyn Erso is her name. Having watched the amazing story of Andor and the journey that Cassian Andor makes, seeing Rogue One again was just incredible. And I had forgotten on its merits, on its own, what an exciting film it is. I highly recommend it. If you haven't seen it, even if you're not a huge Star Wars fan, if you like action, if you like drama, if you like amazing special effects, a little bit of humor, really sincere characters, watch that film because it is nonstop. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I don't think there is a minute or more that is wasted on filler. The story just keeps moving along because there's an urgency to it. And the time that the story takes is probably just a few days. I mean, it's not a long story. The last battle in there, the Battle of Scarif, is amazing. I mean, it just watching it again just made me realize how fun Star Wars films are, and seeing the battle and the ships and the people in the ships and stormtroopers. And I mean, it just is amazing. But also what makes Rogue One unique, and this is where the relevance is for us today as we face a rising fascist dictatorship in our own country. if you are an American watching this. What the theme is that runs through Andor and through Rogue One is sacrifice, is that in order to gain success, in order to gain freedom, in order to topple unjust empires, systems, sacrifice has to be made. And character after character after character makes what the military calls the ultimate sacrifice, right? In death. And that is one of the most amazing things about Rogue One. And I'm not going to spoil this for you, but in the battle, this last battle that they have, it becomes clear that no one's getting out. And we see the tragedy of that. These characters we've gotten to know, we see their demise and the way that each of them gives his or her life for this cause. We also see, and I'll end with this thought, we also see just how little tiny things add up, right? How little heroic gestures, because it's all about these plans, right? And there's so many times, even in the last few frames of the film, that these plans could have been stopped from getting where they needed to be. And it's a reminder of small acts of heroism, right? Passing from one person to the next. Small and ultimate sacrifices, how they lead up to freedom, and how freedom is only gained through that. So I want to end with a sense of hope, because that is a theme that runs through all of these films and TV shows, is hope. And twice in Rogue One, characters say rebellions are built on hope. So y'all, as we go into this Labor Day weekend, as we celebrate the history of labor and stand up for the value of the dignity of work, our former senator and hopefully future senator Sherrod Brown really got well known here in Ohio for that, furthering that idea, working for that idea, the dignity of hope. There's lots of rallies this weekend. There's actions, there's protests. I hope you join one. I know I'm going to one on Monday, Labor Day. I'm going to pass on the hot dogs and hamburgers for that day and get out and use my First Amendment rights while I still have them to be able to speak. All right, y'all, we all have a part to play in this. Let's say the Serenity Prayer together, because that reminds us that we do what we can, we accept what we can't, and we ask for and seek the discernment to know the difference between those two. So let us pray the we version. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, O God, not ours, be done. All right, y'all. Enjoy your Saturday. I'll be back again with you soon. Blessing and good. Be bold. Be well.